We celebrate feminism's victory in increasing female college enrollment rates and employment. We celebrate successes like the Me Too movement that address silent cases of sexual violence, but now feminism must transform from a group not just for female empowerment, but to one that reflects the true concept of equality. So for the model, feminism will advocate for a conscription system, for example, like in Norway and Sweden, where women also get basic training and serve for the same duration as men. It will also support zero tolerance policies against discrimination and report systems for any harassment that will happen. Based on this, two contentions. First contention on how male-only conscription is unjust segregation. Note that the state burdens only fully capable citizens with duties such as tax or military service. When early democracies only taxed white male landowners, the rest were deemed not demo, or in English, people. So when certain minorities are exempt from civic duties, it means that the state views the social class as categorically inferior because they are deficient in some way or another. So then, the exemption of women from military service is systemic segregation. So based on the state's classification of women as too fragile to serve. Note that this is not conjecture. It's the official stance of, for example, the Korean government. Last year, the Constitutional Court of Korea ruled against female military conscription by reason that men and women have different physical capabilities. Three implications here. Firstly, feminism has a moral obligation to oppose segregation as we did against the denial of suffrage or deprivation of female education in Afghanistan. Since the goal of feminism is to promote equal rights and duties for women, feminists should actively oppose this arbitrary system categorizing women as inferior. But secondly, this chauvinist policy levies disproportionate burden on men. Patriarchy harms men just as much as it hurts women. And since feminism's mandate expands to all victims of patriarchal practices, feminists should actively combat this patriarchal system that victimizes men. But thirdly, note that the state-authorized segregation has never been challenged by, for example, internal bodies, and male rights activists that argue for female conscription do it only in just to blame the women. Hence, this feminist movement is the only and best organization that can advocate for equal conscription with appropriate nuance. Second argument on how our side addresses social stigma and create critical mass. In states like Korea and Singapore, the main social narrative that is used to marginalize women typically is that they don't have enough experience in the military. We say that this narrative justifies denying women promotions for not fitting well in the organization, or saying men are more entitled to more privileges as rewards for the military service. Even outside of work, women are framed as weak girls that need male protection and are even criticized for leeching off from the military service of others. This prejudicial perception is A, obstructing feminist agendas, and B, undoing feminist agendas, and therefore needs to be actively combated to make meaningful strides in women's interests. Three mechanisms on how government uniquely solves this as a whole. Firstly, feminism can get approval from, for example, like previously apathetic men by showing women are willing to take equal responsibilities. More public support equates to a critical mass that could actually raise social awareness on feminist agendas, but also, and more importantly, increase votes for legislative change in favor of gender equality. Second, being a veteran grants women access to military experience talks and equal opportunities. The implication of this is that men are now more likely to see women as equals instead of vulnerable women, which opens women's entrance into the old boys club. This means that corporate and political structures are much more likely to embrace the promotion of women into, for example, leadership positions in corporations, and ending the structural inequalities that has always caused disparities, such as gender pay gaps, and stem from gender prejudice. But thirdly, this can further catalyze the social capital amongst women to galvanize the feminist movement, because in the past, women condoned gender discrimination in the workplace and other social spheres because they saw themselves as categorically inferior. Now, instead of internalizing systemic discrimination, women become more assertive of their rights and interests because now they too can pick up a rifle to defend their country. This means that the feminist movement can now finally tap into a broader female populace to propel social change. This social capital is non-existent in ops world. We're the team that addresses both the state and society's unjust treatment of both women and men, ready to defend this country. Propose.
The side government failed to engage with the reality that the most women do not want to be forced to go to the military. Without explaining how the coercion of individuals that they care about the most is justified, they contradict their entire purpose and the goal of feminist movement. The setup is that we're trying to create a world that where women have the maximum potential and inside an equal world, right? This means that as a feminist movement, the goal of creating equity and equality, female conscription is simply putting double standards for women to overcome. We say it's frankly unreasonable to create a society where women have to earn their reputation, earn their equality when humans are born equal, right? Firstly, the government has few rebuttals. The government has mentioned that patriarchy harms men, combats which victimizes men. But in the society, women are actually facing quite extreme discrimination, and we see that the Constitution further exacerbates such problems, taking away ears and big neglections on the problems that can happen inside the military. Now, directly move with our first argument, mandatory female conscription violates the purpose and the foundation of feminism. 2 points. Number one, firstly, it is commonly accepted the truth that the role of feminism is to maximize women's choices. Throughout history, feminist discourse has always been highlighted in liberation and empowerment of women if women can make choices for themselves. Mandatory conscription is the exact opposite of that. This is important because the feminist movement advocating for the deprivation of female choices makes them principally inconsistent and therefore compromises the legitimacy of any feminist discourse. The foundation of feminism is not to enforce certain options or spoon-feed them with potential careers, but to give them the freedom and maximize their options for the future. Secondly, we can easily agree that feminism exists to protect women. If you support forcing unwilling women to go to the military and expose them to dangerous situations, especially when the country is still unprepared to meet the needs of the women soldiers, then you're not supporting the women, but simply appeasing harmful misogynistic narratives on what side government is against. We're not saying that women are incapable or suggesting anything along the lines of that, but we think that's simply going against and contradicting the point in the core values of feminism. The intent of feminism to actually protect women, and if you're going to force women, especially those who are unwilling to go to the military and expose them to something that they're against, this contradicts the basic pillars of feminism. And the government cannot simply say that this conscription is a justified action to gain reputation and equality. Why? Because the action of gaining reputation and from constipation is unfair from the get-go. So we would rather argue that the equality of women in ways does not harm women in any way. This argument is so important because in the government's entire principle stands on combating sexism, misogynistic perceptions become worse in countries like South Korea or Turkey on their side. The sexual objectification and stereotypes that they mentioned would only be reflected far worse within the military. Moving on to my second argument, advocating female conscription is a counterproductive strategy for the feminist movement to gain political momentum. The premise of this argument is that nobody wants to sacrifice themselves against their will, right? This is especially true in countries like South Korea, where gender conflicts violate and military services are perceived as a huge sacrifice. This is a simple fact that a lot of women do not want to be forced into military service, will somewhat dissociate themselves from political discourse of feminism. It's hard for 2 reasons. Number one, firstly, the feminist movement will lose the ability to mobilize enough political willpower to make any actual changes in the politics. If you lose support from women, you lose the biggest potential allies. Losing women for a movement is that aims to protect women is quite easy, and the only thing that needs to happen is making women to do things that are against their will. Secondly, this fractures the feminist movement. Political fragmentation will happen with many women blaming the movement, but most importantly, where feminists, even feminists themselves, will be still deceived that stands especially since the number of them strongly stand with the idea that equal choices and opportunities for both sexes, something that the government side contradicts since they do not value the consent of the woman. We think that the government side is forcing women to do things that they're against their will. And not only the biggest problem of the government side is that there's a big chance of the feminist movement who will lose their biggest group of followers, of supporters, women, if they continue to force women to do things against their will. This is ultimately counterproductive. We think that the feminist movement won't be extremely counterintuitive and to decide to do this, and therefore they are likeliness and the chances of people favor the government team's world. Therefore, so proud to propose. Thank you.
Opposition's case fails to recognize that the feminist agenda to progress women's interests have effectively come to a halt. Unequal conscription is radicalizing men and politicizing equality and regressing the feminist movement. My contention will show that in order to further advance women's interests, they need to seek cross-gender collaboration with men in this, and that only then will there be practical improvements of women's rights and the genuine recovery of gender relations. Some rebuttals. First, opposition says this violates the principles of feminism. Firstly, this is not true. We tell you, because women don't go to the military, people hold the prejudice that they should not be allowed to advance in society, right? So here they can't push their agenda. But secondly, they said women might not go to the military. A, that's not our burden to prove. Our burden is to prove how the school fits the principles of gender equality and is a good strategy for the movement to institute change. But B, this also backfires on the opposition, since the success in alternate advocacy projects aren't guaranteed on their side, either, especially when gender politics is deteriorating the relationship between both genders. Based on pure probabilities, progressing women's rights then is more likely to occur on our side when men begin to perceive women as equals. Then opposition said forcing them to go to the military violates their rights. First, this is not true. A, we said that feminism is to strive for women's rights based on the equality of the genders. This means that we should fight against the perception that women are weak and different, which is why they have to oppose discrimination mandatory conscription. But B, opposition cannot be at the stance. We are already debating in a context where conscription is already the norm due to outside threats or political motivations. The feminist movement does not have the social political capital to actively oppose a strong government tool and community like the military, especially when it is deeply ingrained in South Korean or Singaporean culture. This worsens the feminist movement's image, since now it is going against the key interest of any country, national security. And that would jeopardize the entire social and political capital feminists have been accumulating for decades, which utterly destroys any momentum we need to advance feminist agendas. So, conclusion, that's why their stance towards feminists even more, as they're not perceived as a threat to national security. Next, government talked about fragmentation, but we tell you no, this wouldn't fragment social capital, but would in fact create more social capital for the feminist movement. Why? In the status quo, even if women experience structural racism, say in the workplace, it's hard to assert their rights and interests, especially when they're perceived as being privileged, and then this would incur the wrath of other men. That's why Annabelle told you that this would catalyze women to engage in more social activism, since now they serve their duties equally. They would feel justified in demanding the rectification of systematic inequities and equal treatment. In ops world, fragmentation persists because most women are reluctant to participate, since they're cognizant of the hypocrisy within the feminist movement itself. So what's the conclusion? That's why opposition will never have the social change that they want. So moving on to my third contention on the promotion of cross-gender agendas. Countries like Korea or Singapore are suffering from a gender war where younger men fervently oppose feminist agendas since they see them as antithetical to theirs. This counter phenomenon called meninism is what elected President Yoon of Korea into office, who proposed abolishing the Korean Ministry of Gender Equality and providing men with more privileges in national exams. Two impacts. First, feminist efforts to advance policies that benefit women, such as extending paid maternity leave, funding safe abortion procedures, and promoting women in STEM, are obstructed by a lack of support from these meninists. But second, politicians leverage meninist discontent to secure electoral victories, diminishing state motivation to respond to feminist causes. So how does this change in the counterfactual? 2 points here. First, meninists now lose the chance to radicalize ordinary men or to frame women as threats or free riders, preserving the critical mass feminist need. But second, feminists now are more willing to actively provide the social and political capital for feminists to promote women and cross-gender interests, since they see them as equals. This means both groups can collectively push for equal issues like maternity and paternity leave and other systematic issues that affect both genders. This trickles down to archaic institutions like the military, where both genders can collaborate to address systematic violence that affect all. Ob loses this debate because they erode the capital needed to promote women's rights. We win because we have both genders transcend differences and unify their struggle. This is the future of feminism. I'm more than proud to propose.
We think that the goals of feminism can only be achieved when feminism movements can persuade as many women as possible to support them both on a principle and practical basis. Side government is unstrategic because the feminist movement will simply waste the already little political capital and legitimacy that they already conceded in their speeches. Now, in my speech, I'll be providing and proving two things. Firstly, why women won't be empowered when going to the military and why this will lead to worse gender stereotypes. Moving on to rebuttals. So first of all, Team Government Side tries to prove in today's debate that feminism makes it so that women are more empowered and are able to protect themselves. We think that this is untrue because we think that conscription leading to empowerment is untrue because reforms that allow women to participate in the military to fullest extent won't happen and women are not willing. What this means is that going to the military will have less impact and they will still be perceived as secondary soldiers, which is worse for women as a whole. Now, firstly, insofar as there are long historical context that these countries have dominant male participation, the representation from the government leaders and generals who have high positions is still mostly men. Now, this is important because in the status quo, conscriptions are technically those who do not have much say and are bound by the responsibilities that are demanded within the existing structures of the military. Now, this leads to them being more inclined to prioritize men. Now, secondly, a conductive environment for women in the military can only happen if reasonable gender equality is achieved, which is not the setting of the motion. Now, this is the comparison of countries like Israel and South Korea versus countries like Norway. Norway already spends an equitable amount of resources on women-related issues, while countries like South Korea have recently scrapped their gender department on the government. So we think that the government side's impact is quite far-fetched and wouldn't fall under the setting of today's debate. Now, lastly, this wastes a lot of the very little capital of the feminist movement that has wishes to vouch for better welfare programs for women, such as the increased gender crimes, unique health issues that women face, and other types of discriminations for both genders. Now, secondly, this only puts women in greater vulnerability if they're forced into the military without proper equality or other sources. Now, this means that gender-related crimes may be far worse, such as harassment. Like, for example, volunteer female soldiers in South Korea recently committed suicide because none of their higher-ups decided to defend her on her case to be publicized. And these harms are likely to happen, and granted that the military is one of the most traditional and patriarchal institutions backed by existing sexist narratives in the male-only conscripted countries. Now, all of these are conceded by government to a certain degree, so it is unclear why it should be the burden of the women who are forced into the military to solve such problems. Now, this rebuttal is important because women will spend a far much harder time in the military, and this wouldn't necessarily lead to empowerment, and this wastes very little capital that can be used in otherwise. So we think that it's not strategic for the feminist movement to do this. Moving on to my third argument on mandatory female conscription leads to worse gender stereotypes. Now, this is likely because being drafted into the military is not only about becoming a soldier, but also about what jobs and tasks you are assigned to do as a soldier. Now, therefore, it is extremely likely that women will do feminine jobs that are not related to combat, such as military cooks or secretaries for combat officers. Now, we already see this in countries like Israel, where they require conscription both for men and women. So as of 2021, 97% of female soldiers in Israel avoided taking combat-related positions within the military. Now, this means that even in countries that have decent gender equality standards, only 3% of the women who volunteer are tasked with combat jobs. Now, this is directly in line with our second argument that this goes against the needs of the feminist movements and the choice of what women actually wants to do. Now, why is this a likely scenario, even in government's best case? Now, since the government side talked about constant misogyny that exists in these states, such as Israel and South Korea, it is unlikely that there will be a shift to having military structure that is reflective on gender equality. Now, without the eradication of misogyny on government side, there will be a constant perception from male conscripts that women are incapable because of the physical differences. Now, while some women can be stronger than women, which we agree, it is difficult to challenge the perception that women are stronger than men because of the obvious physical differences and the history of prolonged stereotypical references used against women. Now, honorable educator, lastly, it is truly team opposite side who fulfills the burden and the goals of the feminist movement in today's debate and who gives women more choices, which is why team opposition should truly prevail in the end of the day. For these reasons, how to oppose it.
Due to the perception that women lack military experience, disqualifies them from progressing into society, they actually encounter prejudice and are consequently unable to promote their agendas. When we overturn that, there's no reason to stop them even more. Then they can promote their feminist agendas in the long run. Propose 2 clashes. First clash, which side ends the gender war? Opposition promotes a gender war. 3 reasons why. 1, because there's systematic segregation. Only fully capable citizens bear the state's burdens, such as tax or military service, while some minorities instead are necessarily exempt from civic duty since the state believes that this one social class is inferior. Note that this is what happens in the status quo. That is to say that this exception is just directly systematic segregation based on the state saying that these women are too fragile to serve. C, we said that feminism is to strive for the women's rights based on the equality of the genders. This means that they should fight against the perception that women are weak and different, which is why they have to oppose discriminatory conscription as a whole. Second point on social stigma. In countries like Korea or Singapore, women are directly marginalized using the social narrative that their lack of military expertise justifies denying them of promotions and privileges. We think this perception also leads to women being viewed as weak and dependent on male protection and even criticized for benefiting from others' military service. We think that this biased view is what directly hinders feminist agendas and directly just reverses feminist achievements, so it must be actively fought against to make real progress in women's interests. We address this 2 things. First, because we demonstrate that women are actually willing to take on equal responsibilities, feminism can actually garner attention from previously indifferent men. Why is this really important? Because it creates a critical mass that raises even more awareness about these feminist agendas that happens on our side. Secondly, this strengthens the social political capital among women to energize the feminist movement. Here, we think that women can actually become more assertive of their rights and interests because they too have to defend their country in the first place, right? But third point on physical differences. First, opposition is directly running away from the crux of the debate because the military already takes differences into considerations by assigning responsibilities and position based on capacity. For example, so South Korea makes physically incapable men perform communal service instead or it even exempts people with disabilities. This shouldn't be the main part of the debate. But secondly, even if it comes to women in general, there are millions of women around the world that are already holding arms. We see that this very stereotypes like feminism have to shatter because the very notion that women are categorically inferior and therefore incapable of holding equal duties is what is justifying these patriarchal stereotypes that women do not deserve equal rights. This very prejudice that feminists need to shatter because it underpins them under this really crucial matter. Second clash, which side can address women's interests better? 3 things. Firstly, feminist endeavors to promote policies beneficial to to women, such as extending maternity leave, or will not face obstacles due to an insufficient backing from men's rights. How do we solve that? A. This serves to bolster the social and political capital among women, providing a strong foundation for energizing the feminist movement. In this context, we believe that women can indeed become more assertive in advocating for their rights and interests, as they have also contributed to the defense of their country, so there's nothing to stop them from going on. B. Also, it was really confusing when Riwon said that it doesn't fit the principle of feminism. Note that the entirety of feminism is based on equality of both genders, so it's only a good strategy for the feminist movement to get rid of this perception that they're essentially categorically inferior. Secondly, politicians exploit the dissatisfaction of men's rights activists to win elections, reducing the government's incentive to address feminist issues. Like, how do we actually solve this? We think that because we have a military background, which actually provides women with entry to discussions on military experience and equal chances, as a result, men are increasingly inclined to view women as equals rather than vulnerable individuals, which directly facilitates women's integration into traditionally male-dominated circles. We think, consequently, corporate and political frameworks are more inclined to support the advancement of these women into leadership roles. Our research shows that over 55% of women in Korea agree that they should take equal arms to protect the country. Two things here. A. So it's not true that women in society are directly against taking on the role of defending their nation, but B. So that's why social capital among women will not erode, but simply transform into demanding the ratification of structural discrimination. We think that the problem with opposition is that they preserve the status quo, which 1. reinforces gender stereotypes, 2. put men and women in direct opposition to each other, 3. make gender wars, make women reluctant to fight against structural discrimination because they feel that they have no right to demand change. That's why we get structural change better. Proud to stand on proposition.
Honorable educator, we think it is at the end of the day who prevails. So directly moving on to some clarification that I would like to offer on the stance of the opposition side. First of all, we're extremely happy to see strong women volunteering for the military, proving themselves in combat opportunities and things like that. The demanding changes in military, and we're happy to see this, but what we're not happy with Kim government is that we're forcing all women to expose themselves to the risk in the military, even if they're not ready or prepared to face this. But not only that, the benefits of GOV are based on the premise that female conscription will lead to substantial female participation. However, this is speculative and predictive because as a mere numerical parity doesn't ensure equitable representation for women. Despite demographic similarities, we can also say that women face challenge in equal representation due to historical injustices, disadvantages, and systemic oppression. So for these reasons, the issue expands to the military as well. So now directly moving on to my first clash. Enforcement with the benefit of the additional representation versus choice of the maximization of opportunities and potential options. So at first glance, it might seem like side up secures more benefits, right? But however, enforcement forces women to accept their fate of being conscripted. But not only that, the goal of feminism is not to force women for better representation, but it's rather to maximize the future responsibilities and the future privileges that they can have. We simply think that their point on how misogynists are persuading the public to believe that male-only conscription is reverse discrimination, but because of the fact that feminists have to combat this narrative, we think the response coming from our side is there's so many ways to combat this perception. Because first of all, the feminist movement can only talk about the historical nature of the narrative, the military, and the fact that government has made the decision to impose male-only conscription. B, the feminist movement can also speak in behalf of men who are bullied and harassed within the military due to the same stereotypical gender norms and oppression that exist there. Or C, the feminist movement can also seek for a better support for men who come back from the military. These are several options that the feminist movement can take to understand the struggles of vulnerable men or men who are under social norms or under oppression. So we simply think that the difference here is that the movement does not have to buy into a misogynistic stance that pursue the equality that both sides aim for in this debate. In comparison, the decision given to misogynists only is more harmful because increases their rhetorical capital, but not only that, this means that other demands to seek reform within the military, especially those of the side government desires, is becomes much more harder due to the perception that the feminist movement is fine with conscription anyways. But it's also important that we give women the choice and a maximized number of options that women can try and experience, because we think we should be able to further attempt women to give more opportunities and potential options. So directly moving on to my second clash, whether it's more important to break misogynistic narratives at the cost of sacrificing feminism's original goals versus preserving feminism's original goal. So this will change the societal perception that women are weak and women need protection. But we simply think the mandatory female conscription will lead to worse gender stereotypes. And why is this the case? The DLO has clearly stated in his third argument that being drafted into the military is not only about becoming a soldier. It's also about what jobs and tasks you're assigned to do as a soldier. Realistically, it's extremely likely that feminine soldiers will be assigned to do non-combat related feminine jobs, like become military cooks or secretaries for combat officers, and there's already statistics to represent that. So we really don't think there's any case on site government that they can reply to, but Also, we just see this in countries like Israel, where they have conscription for both men and women. As of 2021, 97% of female soldiers avoid taking combat-related positions even after their military training. But not only that, 71% of desk job secretaries are being female officers who specifically volunteer for them to be related with combat-related positions. But not only that, even in countries that have decent equality standards, only 1% of women are actually tasked with combat jobs. So therefore, when we are breaking misogynistic narratives at the sacrifice of feminism goals, we are essentially breaking and demolishing the foundation and basis feminism was built upon. But more importantly, preserving feminism's original goal is what gives the impression to the public that women will not give up their stance, and they're willing to fight for gender equality, and that the burden is only receiving the privileges of a biased role. So for these reasons,
Honorable adjudicator is truly the team operator who fulfills the goal of the feminist movement in today's debate, which is a world where we maximize women's choices. We still get no justification from the government that until the end of the debate on how the military is going to fall under the majority of women's interests. Team government side has no adequate rebuttals to the third argument on how this will marginalize women's empowerment and worsen stereotypes, which means that the policy reforms won't happen because of this. We identify many flaws in today's debate. A, problems regarding unfair male conscription. The fairness of male-only conscription generally something that the Supreme Court and the general public decide, right? While we agree that there may be some misogynists who are against this policy, they're not even significant enough to make this change. You're not fighting against the misogynist narrative, but we're giving and conceding to it as you support this motion. What is the trade-off here? Proposition side is giving into the demands of misogynistic narrative that is reverse discrimination. You listen to the demand, they will be demanding more and more. At the same time, you're sacrificing women's choice and the woman's protection in the military and the society. How is this a great trade-off from feminism? Secondly, the purpose of feminism itself in its core and original values. Is it really feminism if the woman goes against the core values of feminist movements and going against the freedom and the choices of women? Being really charitable, we see no reason for these activism, protests, garnering public support and impacting the public are not a bad way to actually promote the idea of feminism. We see that the people who opt out of feminist movement, if they're forced into something that they don't want to do, or something that further disincentivize women. Note that when we're talking about equality, we say that the strategy is unjustified, considering how women already have different duties and leaving them into military conscription, taking away time and safety. See, there are problems inside the military itself that are irreversible and takes too long to actually fix. Countries are currently incapable of supporting all necessities that are actually required inside the military. It'll require a lot of time to figure out the necessities and create separate budgets that'll actually limit the possible and go against the possible physical limits. Consider South Korea, as they recently have notified of the problem of women's mandatory women's conscription, meaning they have no capability to ensure a safe environment in such a short amount of time. We see that the government side is leaving the woman so unprotected in these certain types of situations. D, even if it becomes so charitable, instead a woman will be able to do proper military work, it's more likely that these gender stereotypes will escalate due to this. Now, why is this a more likely case? Because even if we actually label it as military, it is more likely for women to do non-combat or fighting tasks, but rather becoming nurse, cookers, and administration workers. This undermines the ability of this undermines their both physical and mental ability. And since we're further enforcing these narratives that these are incapable of working with combat-related jobs, incapable of physical-related jobs, we think that the government push this negative woman being disadvantaged, the idea of woman being disadvantaged narrative. It is not creating better norms, but creating norms that women don't do anything productive in military. Therefore, since we proved to you why A, it's against the pure values of feminism movement, and B, how military is not a safe place to be in the current status quo, and C, how military will not actually lead to creating a better reputation. So proud to oppose. Thank you.
Feminism relies on equality, which roots from equal conscription. More than proud to propose. The comparative in this debate is that in the status quo, the feminist movements has hit a ceiling because they are unable to further advance women's interests due to the inherent contradiction in their stance, right? By arguing that women are inferior and therefore incapable of serving in the military, this has justified the perpetuation of structural sexism against women. Women are denied equal opportunities in corporate structures and even in public positions. Radical men and patriarchal positions further reject passing legislation that would provide more support for women in various social spheres because of the very fact that they need to appease menace and angry men. But rather, in government's world, since women serve their national duty equally, it's easier to push for changes to promote women's interests as there is no justification to deny women equal opportunities. So if women go to the military, corporations and society will also take into consideration that women sacrifice their personal time to defend their country. So all the privileges that men currently got for their service will be equally shared, and women would not have to go to the extra mile to be employed or appreciated. Hence, even if the progression of women's interests slow down in the short run, in the long run, right, in the long term, we promote more systematic changes and promote women's interests, right? So first issue, who develops the feminist movements? First, we tell you opposition cannot develop the feminist movement because they rely on the status quo, where A, feminists and feminists oppose each other and use each other for political gain, but B, feminists are neglected. The movement is ignored. But secondly, opposition talked about social fragmentation, which we clearly responded to, right? Me and Sean told you that fragmentation does not exist because fragmentation is already happening in opposition's world, and we can address this fragmentation problem by providing more long-term social capital. Two responses we told you. First, Annabelle told you that this would invigorate women to engage in more social activism since they get more courageous because they feel entitled to rights when they do equal duties as men. But secondly, hypocritically, in opposition, fragmentation is consistent because women don't participate in these movements as they are not courageous and they don't feel entitled when they don't do equal duties. They're also afraid of backlash because men have the argument that women don't deserve rights since they don't go to the military. And thirdly, on the other hand, I told you in my argument, feminists and meninists can collaborate and emphasize with similar issues they have with the military so we can further, improve diplomatic talks and whatnot. Second issue, who empowers women comparatively better? Opposition said that women are forced, but we tell you this means that they are opposing conscription as a whole, right? We already responded to by saying this is like out of context where conscription is already the norm. That's the premise we have with our case, right? Then they said some women might not have the physical capabilities, right? They said they're gonna have a hard time in the military because of these physical differences. First, we told you this is the very stereotypes we want to shelve. Sean clearly emphasized that. But secondly, the military already takes into account these differences by putting them in different roles and whatnot, right? So we have these checks and balances. More than proud to propose.